Hi,
We
everybody.
do. Hello.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. We are joined by the fabulous Andrew Watkins, who I have to say, Andrew was one of the first people to welcome me onto the Substack platform. I have been writing on Medium for a long time, but when I joined Substack and started to, read and comment and investigate what Substack was all about, Andrew was one of the first people to, sort of reach out and invite me to come onto her show. And I just appreciate everything you do, Andra. Andra is one of those people. She knows a lot, way more than I do about white Christian nationalism specifically. But we both come from, we both have this feminist background that we, I guess we came at from very different angles because we have very different histories. But the outcome is the same. We're both very outspoken about, women's rights and fascism. But she's stuck. Yeah, go ahead.
We wound up on the same team, coming from very different places.
Yeah, which is amazing. And something wonderful about, I think, something wonderful about being outside of the U.S. too.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I feel like in the U.S., when I was in the U.S., there was a lot of infighting between women. Like a lot of the conversations I was in were hyper focused on the ways in which women differ and the ways in which our struggles differ, which they absolutely do. And race and class have a huge part to play in that. Absolutely. But I think getting out of the United States has helped me to see how universal misogyny is, and how cross-cutting the patriarchy is, and, led me to be a little bit more intentional about connecting with women as women, no matter what other identities they adhere to or they are labeled as. But anyway, so yeah, Andra, we are here to talk. Well, we decided to schedule this after I had posted about Nick Fuentes's comments about sending all women, y'all, all women.
Well, and to the gulags. He said gulags.
Gulags. He said gulags. That was his word.
And somebody pushed back and said, well, what about the trad wives and the good women? Oh, no, there are no good women. They all need to go to the gulags. And they need to stay there until we decide who's good enough to let out. And we'll decide that. That's what he said.
Yeah. Yeah. A 27-year-old, I don't know.
Lives with his mommy.
Does he have an education? Did he even go to school?
I don't know, but he lives with his mommy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So who sent this, Jennifer? Nick Fuentes. He is the far-right influencer he's the Groyper. He's like behind the Groyper.
He's the Groyper daddy. Right? He's a neo-Nazi. And he said all women need to be put in gulags. Yeah.
Yeah. 27 years old. I'm 46. Can you imagine how I feel hearing a 27-year-old boy saying that I should be locked up in jail until he decides whether I get to get out? And spoiler, I would not get out.
Oh, I wouldn't either.
in his dream of America, we'd probably be first to hit the gallows. I mean, given how outspoken we both are. But yeah, I mean, I think the reason that I wanted to give attention to this and speak to it with you, Andra, is because we were just talking about this before we went live, that, I come from this very New York City metropolitan area, progressive, diverse, sort of context where comments like the one that my neighbor said to my husband yesterday, and we won't go too far into that tangent, but this guy's a piece of shit, period. Now, I don't normally curse, but he is literally a piece of shit. And he told my husband that my husband can't control his woman. That's me. So first of all, that's a compliment to both of us, right? To both of us. Yes, we have an equal partnership and we love each other. And no, he can't control me just like I can't control him. not supposed to be like that. Hello. So I come from that context, right? And in that context, growing up in, sort of very liberal spaces, and especially in my career in the nonprofit conservation space, we were taught, like, when people come out with these like Nazi beliefs and, blatantly misogynistic beliefs, and they're ridiculous and they're easily disprovable, you ignore them. You ignore them because they're ridiculous. And I think we messed up. We messed up by ignoring them, because now here they are in power, right? And
Yeah.
Angela is the one that can speak to how did that happen. So speak to us about how this happened.
So I grew up, for those of you who don't know me, in a white Christian nationalist church and school in the U.S. South, in South Carolina, in the 70s and 80s. So the church that I grew up in was one of the founding members of Jerry Falwell Sr.'s Moral Majority. And my textbooks were produced by an offshoot of Bob Jones University. So to give you a flavor, and Pensacola Christian College, which both of those still exist. So to give you a flavor of how I grew up. So men being told that they needed to control their women and keep their women in line and get their women under control and get their women to be submitting is all stuff that we regularly heard growing up.
And
And that
tell us, what were the years that you're talking about? When did you grow up? What decade? What era?
I started kindergarten at that school in 1975, and I graduated from the high school in 1987. So I went to the church
Okay.
school from kindergarten through 12th grade.
Okay.
So, but they very loudly said these things amongst themselves during that period. And also during that period, the Heritage Foundation started in 1973, which is the far right Christian nationalist think tank. That's a domestic terror organization, in my opinion, that was started by a Christian nationalist Catholic, an Opus Dei adjacent Catholic, Paul Weyrich, in 1973. And in 1979, the Moral Majority started with Jerry Falwell Sr. And they partnered on that. Paul Weyrich and Jerry Falwell Sr. partnered on that. And so, and the same year that the Moral Majority happened, they published their first version of Project 2025, Mandate for Leadership. And every 4 years after that, they published a document like that culminated with Project 2025. So they've been working toward this for a long time.
Yeah, let me ask you something, Andrew. When that first started, when like these early iterations of Project 2025 started, what was the response from the rational among us? Like, what was the response from the establishment political sphere? What was the response from human rights organizations? Like, were people like me just completely oblivious to what was going on, or was there a fight happening all along that we weren't really aware of?
I think people were really oblivious to what was going on, and that happened. I mean, my husband grew up very differently from me. So this is another example. He grew up Catholic in the Midwest, but not crazy Catholic, not extremist. And now he's agnostic. But, for a long time, he thought there aren't any people who believe this crazy stuff that I'm hearing these religious fanatics over here say. They're just a fringe group. Nobody believes that. And then he met me. And he married me.
You were like, let me disabuse you.
And he met my family. And he was like, holy shit, these people really do exist. That there are a lot of them. And they really do believe these things that I, for a long time, did not think people believed. So back during the 70s and 80s, I think a lot of people outside of that world just dismissed these people as a bunch of crazy people, as a bunch of religious fanatics, as people who, and we have a very much a Christian bias in the United States where you can, call Islamicist extremists all day long, and that's fine. It's not fine, but, nobody says anything about that. But we can't call Christians extremists. We can't do that, even though we should be doing that. And so for a long time, I think the way that people outside of that camp dealt with them was to just dismiss them as crazy.
Yep.
and dismiss them as something that would eventually fizzle out,
Yep.
and absolutely dismiss them as something that they didn't need to get to know about.
Yeah.
And so now here we are.
I wonder if you know, and because I don't off the top of my head, I'm sure somewhere in my memory I know from like 2 decades ago attending some course, but like, was there a similar denialism that preceded in the decades before other sort of, fascist explosions? Like, for example, was there a parallel to Nazi Germany? Was there a movement? I mean, I know it wasn't necessarily associated with religion, but was there a movement that was being ignored, for a long time as they built power? And then by the time people woke up and admitted what was happening, it was too late. Like, I wonder if this is a pattern. And before you answer that you do have a question here
Yeah.
from Sandy about whether you're still in touch with your white nationalist family.
No, I'm
Yeah,
not.
that's a full answer.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you know that, like, the answer to that question, whether this sort of whether not nipping these things in the bud is something that history has seen before?
Well, if you read Ruth Ben Ghiat, which I highly recommend that people here do, she publishes the Lucid newsletter and is an expert on strong men
Mm,
and wrote a seminal book about Mussolini. And Mussolini really started fascism in Italy about
uh-huh.
10 or 12 years prior to Nazi Germany. And it was very much tied up in religion, and with the
Okay.
Catholic Church. And
Okay.
bringing back Catholic values and all of that. And she writes very eloquently about how he married religion and politics to create this fascist movement that he created in Italy.
Mm,
And Hitler actually used one of the Christian churches in Germany as part of his rise to power. So
okay.
partnering with religion, Putin uses the Russian Orthodox Church in Russia.
Yes.
So
Hmm.
this is not a pairing that is unusual or that people should be ignoring and not taking seriously. I think there's so much American exceptionalism, and still is, where people think, well, that can't happen in America. We're better than that. We can't fall to those things. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
now here we are, where we have really a bunch of radicalized white Christian nationalist extremists running our government.
Hmm.
And I spend a lot of time, a lot of people talk about the president. I hardly ever talk about the president. So if you're sick of
Mm.
hearing about him, you can come follow me, and I almost never talk about him, because the people behind him
All he is a spearhead.
are
He's
the
just a
ones,
spearhead.
yeah, are the ones that are really controlling this and are
Hmm.
putting all these things in place. I mean, Russ Vogt is a radicalized white Christian nationalist extremist, male supremacist, exactly like the Nick Fuentes type of person we're talking about. He's one of those people. And he's, in my view, a co-president with Stephen Miller, who's not a white Christian nationalist. He's Jewish, but he's bought into this and partnered with it.
Yeah. Well, and let me touch on that for a second. Just the idea that, a person's identity or religious affiliation or, gender somehow absolves them from, being complicit or being, straight up proactive in creating this mess. Yeah, I don't no. I don't it's important to critically think and to not allow people to get away with this narrative when they find tokens to represent their agenda and
Mhm.
and leverage them in order to make the case that they're not bigoted, they're not racist, they're not misogynist. We're not misogynist, we have women in leadership. Yeah, okay, I mean, come on. Like, realistically, um you have to dispense with all of those particularities minorities. Like, it doesn't matter that Stephen Miller's born Jewish. Yes, it just exposes that he's self-hating and, capitalizing on a different way that people are being oppressed. Like, that's, so I want to call that out specifically because when we started, we talked about women and connecting with women, but we do need to acknowledge that there are women that absolutely not just are complicit, but are driving the bus, whatever, for whatever reason.
Well, and I can talk
We can
some
go
about
down the
how
rabbit
that
hole.
happens,
Yeah,
because
please.
in these environments, you as a woman or a girl in these environments, you're told that you have a very specific role to play, and when you try to get out of that role, you're pushed back into it. Either you're shamed back into it, or humiliated back into it, or scolded back into it, or ostracized back into it. They have a number of different abusive tools that they can use to put you back in your place. And so one of the only ways that women in these churches can have any other identity besides submissive wife and godly mother is to have some kind of leadership role with women. They can't lead men,
Mhm.
but they can lead women. So in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, Falwell and Weyrich and their crew understood that they needed to use women
Mhm.
to convince women to buy into this. So that's a very powerful position for women in these communities to have, because
It
they
reminds me
get,
of the Aunt Linda
yeah,
in The Handmaid's Tale.
yeah, it's exactly that. And
It's the
so,
Aunt Linda.
so they have power. And we've seen them ride that wave all the way into Congress.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons behind somebody like Marge Green or Elise Stefanik not choosing to run and be in office anymore is because they've sat up there now for a year and had all their male colleagues tell them, you've gotten us the government, and now we don't need you anymore. Go back to the kitchen. The men will take over.
Yep.
Because they think as long as they're aligning with these people and helping them, they're making themselves indispensable, but they're not. And so they
Mhm.
always cast them aside eventually. So, but
And
that's
it's
the
the same thing
dynamic.
with and it's the same thing with, people who are racially racialized other than white, right? It's the
Yes,
same thing with,
yes,
you've seen it with Black Republicans, right?
yes.
All throughout MAGA's history, Black Republicans have been used and discarded, over and over again. You're going to see it with people who are Latino and actually, um, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Treated like Latino, like people who
Hmm.
are racialized, like Marco Rubio, like, you know, are you as white as you think you are? Do you think they're really gonna?
No matter,
I don't know.
it's like he gave in Munich the other day, this week, that he gives
Yes.
like that. They're never going to see him as an equal, because white Christian men are the only ones who matter. And if you think these people don't believe that, I mean, I spend time reading what the other side says. And I took a screenshot today of one of these incels saying, when people empty out countries like Ireland to come to other places and infect them with brown people. And yes, I'm calling Irish brown people because,
What?
that was an invasion of brown people, because historically Irish people were not viewed as white people when they came here.
Wow.
Italians
Okay.
were
So
not viewed as white people.
no, I
Spanish
know
people
that.
were
I know
not viewed
Irish,
as white people.
Italians, even Germans. Germans weren't
Yeah,
viewed as white people when they first
right.
got there, right? I know that, but you're saying right now, this is a modern,
Yes,
recent
yes.
rhetoric
That
that somebody was saying
yes.
Irish are brown people, so they don't want the Irish in the US anymore either?
That's what he was saying. So, when we say fascists will always get to you,
Ugh.
they will always get to you.
Yeah.
They always have to have an enemy,
Well,
and
and
they
the fact is too I'm sorry. No, I'm just gonna say the fact is too, even if you are a white Christian male, you can still be a traitor, right? You can
yeah,
still be a traitor like Alex Pretty was,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I know, he was a white male who wasn't not Christian, right? And I mean, you can still be targeted even if you are within the demographic that you know, they have determined as dominant, right? If you don't agree with them, or if you oppose them, or if you ally with people who are not them.
Well, and another thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about white Christian nationalists is you're dealing with all of them individually.
Mm,
So every one of them has a different threshold about what offends them and what they
mhm,
think is right and wrong. So, for example, and I talked about this in my interview earlier today. Earlier this week, I showed a clip of Jared Moskowitz's questioning, or really, it was hilarious, of Pam Bondi in her hearing
mm,
and how he picked
mm,
up the Trump Bible and said Trump's mentioned more times in the Epstein files than God is mentioned in the book about God.
mhm.
And the only thing she said at the end of that was, "How dare you blaspheme the Bible and make fun of the Bible?"
Yeah,
And
I
so,
remember that. Mhm,
so, you know, I want people to understand that for some people in positions of power in this government, that kind of behavior is all it would take for them to say, "You've violated the law. You've exhibited anti-Christian bias, or you
mhm,
persecuted me as a Christian because you've insulted the
mhm,
Bible." And so that deserves to be prosecuted under NSPM 7. So, every person in that movement has a different threshold about what they're going to say offends them. So you
mhm,
never really know what to do,
mhm,
even if you're a white Christian man. Once
mhm,
they start fighting for the spoils of things, there will be white Christian men who will be other because they're not white Christian enough. They're not
mhm,
Christian nationalist enough. They're not doing enough of the right things, whatever those are, as defined by maybe it's Doug Wilson, who we were talking about before this, or whoever
mhm.
ultimately decides that. But, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
there's never a place where these movements stop. There's
yeah,
always another group of
yeah.
people to go after.
And I think, and to that point, and like adding on to that, one of the core aspects of all of this is the fundamental assumption of entitlement to make those decisions for everyone else.
Mhm,
I think that's the thing that blows my mind the most, that they wholly believe, or they at least seem to wholly believe, that they are the deciders. They are the definers. They are it is the rule. They decide what the rules are for everyone else. They don't have to follow them. They can change them whenever they want. They they are they, they have zero, it seems like zero guilt or awareness or shame when they lie about verifiable facts in order to support their argument. And they will lie from one sentence, like they'll change from one sentence to another without blinking. And all of these behaviors are behaviors that people like me, who were raised to believe in, equity and being, respectful to people and fairness and just, it took me, I mean, I didn't really grasp any of before the election. I didn't really grasp until I was working with people that, uh, you know, old white fishermen in the Gulf of Mexico in the US, because I was working in conservation, that I really was exposed to people that would sit there and tell me a bold-faced lie that I could verifiably, like I could contradict with evidence, and they wouldn't accept the evidence.
mhm,
They wouldn't accept that they were wrong. They wouldn't accept, they would just turn it around and attack me. And I was like, "What?" Like, this was, and I grew up in I realized how much privilege I had in growing up around people from all over the world, well, mostly Caribbean and the Americas. And we would debate. I mean, I would sit around with my friends and we would debate and we would get heated and we would yell, but nobody ever tried to assert lies as truth,
mhm.
because you do that, you get called out. You've lost credibility. Get out of here. Nah, come on. They don't follow those rules. And that is the scariest part of it for me, because how do you prove your innocence? How do you prove your compliance with the law? How do you prove that you did the right things, you're within your rights, when people are so willing to lie and change and shift the baseline just to accommodate whatever they want in the moment? Like, what do we do? How do we fight this? How do we fight this?
I think the first thing that everybody here could take away from this is Christian nationalist men believe that Genesis chapter 1 rules everything. And they interpret it a certain way. Doesn't mean it's the right way. They violate the second commandment because they make themselves as God to say, I know what God meant here better than you do. And so I'm going to say, this is what it means, that I get to have dominion over everything, that I rule, that I get to say what goes, that women are inferior, that women have to submit, that women are temptresses and deserve to be raped at whatever age because, Eve ate the apple or ate the fruit first and tempted Adam to fall with her. So, that I don't think enough Americans appreciate that is their worldview, that they are taking the first chapter of the Bible and applying it to the entire world and thus giving themselves power in how they interpret the Bible. And I don't personally care how somebody interprets the Bible. I don't care if they don't like the Bible. I don't care if some other religious text speaks to them more. I don't care what people are doing personally. Where this becomes a problem is you can believe whatever you want and you have to answer for that when you die. You can't force me to believe that,
And that's one of the
and trying to read
our country
and trying to read the Bible this way and say that somehow you're just as good as God and can tell me that you have a right as a God to force me to do something or believe something. I reject that, and that's religious extremism that I'm just not going to accept. And I think more people need to be pushing back against this that way and calling it what it is instead of being afraid to do that.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up a really good point earlier about how quickly people from the US are how quickly they will accept narratives about other religions being oppressive and being theocratic, which they are. Like, somebody asked a question about Iran. I'm not going to get into Iran. I don't have the I don't have the intellectual and academic authority to get into the current political situation in Iran. What I can tell you is that I know from following an Iranian woman who left Iran a long time ago that the human rights and the human rights offenses and the persecution of women in Iran is not different than what we're talking about.
Right.
Like,
It's the
I
same
think
thing.
what I want to say about, I want to say, like, theocracy is theocracy, period. I don't want it, period. I don't care whose book and what the title of the book is and what language it's written in. What you just said about, the lack of authority for individual people who believe in their religion to impose it on other people is fundamental to the founding of the United States. We have the Establishment Clause in there for a reason. The government shall not establish a religion for the country, and they have. It's it's everywhere you look now. Like, the Pete Hegseth videos, the ICE recruitment videos. If we were in a different era in American history right now, like if this were the 90s or whatever, and they were pulling the stuff that they're pulling now, the Supreme Court would come down on them really hard because they are violating the Establishment Clause over and over and over again. It's one of the core reasons why people have come to the United States, right? I
Mhm.
mean, people have fled to the United States to escape religious persecution and being forced to practice a religion other than their own. That was what the first Europeans that came over there were doing that, right? They were running from being forced to participate in a religion that they didn't want to. It's so fundamental to what we think the United States is. And yet it's like people are oblivious to what's going on. And I love that you don't talk about Trump, because Trump was just a key that opened a door. He wasn't, he opened this, but this was festering all along. This was building all along. And all of this focus on him detracts from the reality that when he dies, because he will die because he's an old man,
Mhm.
all these people are next in line. I mean, tell me, like, I can't remember if it was you that said, Nick Fuentes, the one who said that women should all be in gulags and then only allowed to leave after they've gotten his fucking stamp of approval. Excuse my language. I mean, I just can't with this 27-year-old mama's boy living in his mother's basement telling me he's going to tell me whether I get to get out of jail or not. Please. Anyway, sorry. I don't remember if it was you that said he's one of the like front runners, like he's one of the people that will be picking up the mantle and like be a part of this movement going forward. Was that you?
I did not say that, but I can't remember who did. I saw it and I agree with that. He's exactly the kind of person that they would want to be part of this. So, but I mean, JD Vance is certainly a Opus Dei adjacent Catholic white Christian nationalist extremist, and Opus Dei is a cult within the Catholic Church that Francis was getting
Mm-hmm.
ready to sanction and strip all of
Mm-hmm.
its stuff away from before he died. So, and they're very active around the world, also involved in human trafficking and enslaving women and sex abuse and all of the things that we see in the Epstein class. So, he's involved in that. Russ Vogt, we don't really know what he is, but he's a Christian nationalist too. Pete Hegseth is a dominionist, charismatic Christian nationalist. Doug Wilson is his pastor, and we saw a picture of them on Twitter yesterday praying in the Pentagon at their monthly church service that they have now at the Pentagon. So, you know, what more Americans, I think, would be wise to get comfortable with. You don't have to be a Christian. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to be an expert on Christian nationalism to push back against this when you see it by simply
Mm-hmm.
saying, everybody has a right to believe whatever they want. I don't want to interfere with you going to church and believing whatever you want. Some of it may
Mm-hmm.
really offend me, but that's part of democracy. But
Mm-hmm.
you do not have a right to tell me what I'm going to believe and to tell me how I'm going to live my life. And they'll come
Mm-hmm.
back with, but the Bible, I don't care what the Bible says. That applies, you can apply that to your life. And you can say, I
Mm-hmm.
have to apply it to my life and that God will, but that's an after this life thing. We'll find out then who's right. So,
Mm-hmm. Right.
until then,
I won't be seeing you.
yeah, I mean, until then, I'm perfectly comfortable approaching all that the way I do. And that doesn't have anything to do with you. So, we need to get a lot more comfortable saying that and pushing back with those kinds of messages to Christian nationalists. We don't have to get into biblical arguments with them. We don't have to demean their faith to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're
No,
just
and I don't think we
establishing
should.
a
I mean,
boundary.
yeah. And that's an important point too. That is an important point I want to touch on, because that is something that I also saw in my liberal bubbles that I didn't agree with. So I had my like progressive liberal bubbles that I grew up with, which were very diverse, and a lot of people from Latin America and the Caribbean. So they were Catholic or Santeras or, so like they had spiritual affiliations. And then when I went to go work for these big, flashy international nonprofit organizations, most of my colleagues were white. They grew up in, white middle class atheist households, like very, science and religion don't go together. You can't believe in one without the other. And so they would ridicule people's faith. And I was never comfortable with that, because faith is a personal decision in my mind, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
if you want to believe what the Bible says literally, then that's on you. Go ahead and do that in your life. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that we do ourselves any favors by dismissing the. I mean, faith is a human need, right? That goes back from I guess the time that we started developing our brains to think about existential questions, right? We
Right.
had to come up with something, right? And so, and to be honest, and I said this. This is I don't want to get too off topic, but I actually think part of the problem for a lot of these men is that they are lacking in a true spiritual, in having any spiritual connection. Like they want to become gods, but they don't really believe there's something out there holding them. They don't really believe there's something out there holding them, because if they did, they wouldn't be so thirsty for power, and they wouldn't be so thirsty for more. You know what I
Well,
mean? When you're like, but I
well,
don't want
I
to go
mean,
down that road.
you know, Christian nationalists they don't have any faith. And that's another
Yeah.
thing. Faith is believing something you can't prove because it speaks to you. And
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't make any sense. Maybe it sounds crazy to everybody else, but it speaks to you. It helps you cope with the fact that you're going to die someday and you don't know what happens after that. And so
Mhm.
you choose to
Mhm.
believe that because it speaks to you. And there's nothing wrong with that. Whatever somebody here believes about that is fine with me, because that is a personal decision.
Mhm.
But this group of people can't handle not
Mhm.
knowing. They
Mhm.
have to be certain. And this is a lot of people. The fact that we're going to all die someday and we don't know what in the world happens after that is scary.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So, they have to be certain. So their faith is not faith, it's certainty. And so
Mhm.
because it's
Which is so
certainty,
ironic.
yeah, they are certain that they're right. They are certain that their God is the one true God. They are certain that their way to heaven is the only way, even though even within the Christian nationalist camp, they don't agree about what that is.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, but they're all certain about it. So they are completely faithless people
Mhm.
who
Because
get
faith and certainty
very,
don't go together.
they're the opposite. And so,
Yeah.
they get very emotionally upset when you start poking at that, because
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
they can't handle
Mhm.
anything other
They're
than
very
certainty.
fragile.
Yeah.
They're very
So,
fragile, and they have very little emotional regulation. Like
well,
very little ability to emotionally regulate, from what I can see.
growing up in that environment, you're emotionally stunted
Yeah.
from that environment. So, a lot of the
Yeah.
work that I've had to do as an adult is try to figure out how to onboard those tools in my 30s and 40s,
Mm.
because I did not have them from
Mhm.
that upbringing.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit, because, as you know, uh, I would say 90% of my business now, maybe 95% of my business now, is actually helping people emigrate out of the United States. And to do it, conscientiously, to do it with ethics, to do it with awareness of all of the issues that people from the US often bring into our new countries, particularly if we're moving to countries that, have a lower GDP and, are classified as developing or whatever. So I want to talk a little bit about, well, actually, I'm just going to ask you a direct question. If you don't want to answer it, you don't need to. I know you don't talk about where you're living, but we know that you left the United States. I want to know, to what degree was your decision to leave driven by this trajectory that the US is on?
That's going to be a little bit of an answer. My husband, before we met, lived in Barcelona, Spain, and taught architecture there. He'd also lived in Paris and Tokyo. So when he retired, his goal was to retire outside of the US. And that was a goal that he had when we met. When we met, I'd been out of the country one time. I'd never traveled. I'd never been anywhere. And
Oh,
now people who know how much I have traveled in my 30s, 40s, and 50s will be stunned. But I'd never been anywhere when we met. I was just a good old Southern girl who was still pretty dumb and naive when we met. So,
wow.
it took some time for me to gain some life experience and see if I even liked traveling, if I liked going places and experiencing the world. And so about
Mm,
10, 15 years into our relationship, I said, it was in 2016, 2015. It was in 2015. And I said, I'm ready to think about leaving the US. And my husband was like, well, you've never really lived outside the US. So it's very different from being a
mm,
tourist.
mhm,
And so you might struggle with that. So I started getting writing residencies. I have books published and applied for writing residencies in Europe where I could stay somewhere
mm,
for a chunk of time and see, is this something I can do?
mhm,
And I mean, that was a first world approach. I had the ability to do that. So I did that. So, it wasn't necessarily what was happening politically in the US that drove our decisions. Where we've ended up
mhm.
was very much a part of that decision because I wanted to be in a secular country
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
culture values progressive things and values all human beings and doesn't
mhm,
force religion on people. So,
yeah,
but that wasn't, we were just looking to find a place that shared our values because even before this fascist presidency that happened the first time happened, neither one of us felt like we fit in the US. And
mm,
that's
mhm,
that's something that might be pretty common for a lot of people here. You know, choosing to leave the country you were born in is a very complex decision.
mhm.
Choosing to stay is a complex decision. So, there's no right or wrong decision with that except the decision that you make
Yes.
for yourself.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so, I hope we've made the right decision and I guess we'll see. But, it's really important to care about the culture you're going to learn about it, to not try to replicate the United States where you're at, to respect the language, to respect the customs, and to try to become a part of that culture
Yeah,
instead of just creating some bubble of the United States where you don't
yeah,
really have to grow and change.
yeah,
Um, for both of us, that was really important.
yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. I mean, I think two things that stand out to me is, wow, like you came from this super sheltered, super controlled, didn't travel, kind of origin, right? And yet you've expanded your world greatly, right? Through these writing residencies and now being an immigrant from the US. Like I just let's give
No, no,
applause.
I mean,
Applause. It's
I
a
will
big
still
deal. It's a
just
big
be
deal because yeah.
walking somewhere random or walk into a museum and I'll just start to cry because I can't believe. It's like I can't believe I'm here. I can't
Mhm.
believe I did this.
Yeah.
10-year-old me, I would read novels and to travel. And
Yeah.
that I actually, I mean, the first place I went outside the US and Europe was Paris. And my
Yeah.
husband organized this thing where we got out of the train at Notre Dame and it was raining. It was horrible. And I was mad because I hadn't slept on the flight. But we came up out of the subway and looked to my left and there was Notre Dame. And I just started to cry. I mean, I'd read The Hunchback of Notre Dame. You know, I'd read books and I just was like, I can't believe I'm actually seeing that. It was, and I
Yeah.
still have those experiences all the time. I mean, it's, I don't. I mean, I'm an adventurous person and will just do things. And a lot of people aren't that, and they get very bent out of whack with that. And you have to
Mhm.
understand yourself to
Yeah.
be able to do this too.
Yeah. No, for sure. And it's interesting because the same, like, although again, we come from very different backgrounds, but in my case, I was a teenage mother, right? I was a teenage mother. I had my daughter when I was 15 years old. I turned 16 2 weeks after she was born. And I was single. Her father was not around. And I was poor, right? And I was poor before I got pregnant, but I was poorer afterwards, right? So I mean, I remember being in my mid 20s, still living with my father because I couldn't afford to do anything else, and
Hmm.
believing that I might not ever even have my own place. Like, that's how much my thinking was limited by my circumstances. That I remember telling I had a friend who was older. Thank you, Beth. Um, telling a friend who was older than me, like, I can't see a way out of this, this poverty, like, stranglehold, and I just cannot even envision myself having my own place, which I desperately needed. I was 30 years old, you
Hmm.
know? Like, and I just needed my own space, and I remember her telling me, like, you definitely will." And sometimes, you just need that, like, one person who knows you and is successful in their own right to, like, instill that hope in you. But I I find myself, and Wes was also a teenage dad. He had his kids when he got married at night. He was in a Christian cult, and
Hmm.
you've talked about that with his husband. And he was a teenage dad too. And, like, we just grew up with, like, so little, and so uh, you know our parameters for ourselves were very limited. Even in my case, growing up in New York, it just, it's like, that's what other people do. Other people are able to travel the world. Other people are able to do these things, whatever. So I experienced that same, like, I can't believe I'm here. And I'm in a place that I vacationed for a very long time, over and over and over. I would come here even by myself to go in the ocean because that's my love. And I'm like, oh my God, we really did this. It wasn't easy, but we did it and we're here. And I just want to say one thing about what you talked about, expat bubbles and all of that, and not importing your bad behavior. So where we live, this little village, this little ejido, it's called an ejido. It's a farming village. This is, where that comes from. When we moved into it, which was about 2.5 years ago, we moved into this village in a different house. It was super quiet, and there were almost no other people from the US living in this neighborhood because it's very far from town. Power goes out a lot. It's the country.
Hmm.
Apparently, it's become appealing, right? And so now more people from the United States are moving here. And this ties in. I want to, touch on this now that we have all these people here. It ties into this conversation because I've written 3 articles about this already. Last summer, an American man from he sounds like he's from the South someplace, moved in next door, and it just started with lies and bad behavior right at the bat. And essentially, lying about what he was doing. He was running all these power tools. He has a table saw on the front porch, and he claimed that it was just his hobby. We now know he's working off the books. He has this whole workshop, and he's just been so horrendously disrespectful and rude to me, to the owner of my house. And she's a Mexican older woman her last name is on the street. That's how far her roots go back in this neighborhood. Okay. And he, like, blasted her. And, like, it's been an ongoing thing, whatever. But yesterday something happened. My husband went and confronted him because he actually had he recruited some other psychopath and showed up at my front gate yelling at us for our music, yelling at me, calling me an asshole. So my husband went and confronted him like a man, went to his front door, and they had words, whatever. It didn't go anywhere, but it was good because he needed to know that I'm not alone here, you know?
Hmm.
But what he told my husband is, you can't control your woman. And I was like, holy shit, it is 2026. And this man said those words out of his face. This is not the internet. This is not a bot. This is an actual
Yeah.
human being who lives next door to me. And those words came out of his face. Wow. Now, we're in Mexico, right? We have a woman for a president.
Mhm.
The governor in the state where we live is a woman. How, Andrea? How do they reconcile? Like, how do they reconcile this? How do they believe that they can, that they have the moral authority to judge another man for not being controlling enough
Well,
in a country women are holding the serious power? How do you reconcile that?
well, he probably doesn't even know that. He probably
That
doesn't
that
even
we have
know
a
Mexico's president. He probably doesn't. I mean, a
no.
lot of these men are just very, very oblivious to a lot of things. So, and as you said earlier, when you try to show them facts, they're like, that's not true. And I don't even want to see that. So a
Yeah,
lot of them
yeah,
have created their own little universe that they spend all their time in and convince themselves
yeah,
that that's the right thing. So, I mean, who
yeah.
knows what you, as we said in the pre-show, he's divorced. He doesn't have a
Oh yeah.
woman to control. And the
Yeah,
woman
yeah,
that
that's
he,
the other irony, right? It's
yeah.
he said, "You can't control your woman," and he's over there alone. I mean,
Hmm.
alone.
Hmm.
He pays people
And
to
there's a
come help
reason for
him
that.
work, but
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. And the other person that he recruited to come yell in our front yard is also somebody who lives alone with 7 dogs. I've never seen him wear a shirt that's not full of holes. And he apparently, when I spoke to the people that work, in the front or whatever, they said he's a problem.
Hmm.
He's somebody that has given them problems over and over and over. Just these, and it's like these problematic single. It's the manosphere, right? Most of them are single. Some of them have relationships that ultimately fail, right? Because you can't have a relationship with somebody like that. And what do we do with them? Because they're out here running rampant and causing havoc, right? And we and they have a lot more time and energy to commit to their hateful campaigns than normal people who are, busy just trying to live life and survive and make a living and have friends and do enjoyable things. Like, what do we do with them?
I can't do
I'm
anything with
sorry,
them.
it's not your job to know the
No, but
answer to that. But
no, but it's important for people to hear if you're an American who's traveling abroad or if you've moved abroad, it's just really important to be gracious and kind and smile at people and be kind to people. Observe the customs and traditions of the people around you.
Mhm,
Be appreciative of where you are. Say thank you. I mean, just basic human decency, but it's really important. And don't talk loud in public, which Americans all do. Talk
mhm,
talk softer when you're in public.
mhm, yeah,
There are certain things that you can do, whatever your position is, to try to hit back on these ugly American narratives that happen. I mean, there are assholes in every nationality. They
oh,
exist
yeah,
in every
absolutely,
nationality. But it's up to
absolutely,
each of us to try to create a different story for that
yeah.
and to be better than that. And that's what I try to
Yeah,
do.
and I mean, that's core to my work, right? But fortunately, I think because I've written so much about that issue, like the people that come to me tend to already get it for, and our work together tends to be more around like, all right, how do we get you this visa?
Hmm.
How do we put the pieces in place to get you there? How do you choose a place to live? All of that. But you know, I think what I am struggling with now in seeing the terrible, this example of bad behavior, is trying to figure out, like, and what he's doing is not the culture of
Right.
this neighborhood at all. Like, people are super humble, super kind. We've had no problems with anyone else. It all started when he moved in. The question, like, there's the problem. I guess where I'm stuck is, well, like, how do we get accountability? For, like, where is the accountability to stop these people that are running around, not just in Mexico, not like globally, right? How do we stop this trend? And can we? I mean, as I feel like as women, we can't, because they don't listen to us. Like, I'm way more educated than this piece of mierda next door, okay? But
Hmm.
that's irrelevant. In fact, it probably pisses him off, right? So, like, what women, they don't listen to us, they don't respect us. So, like, how do we hold people accountable for not for bad behavior, and instill some sense of consequence so that they stop doing it, right? I mean, like,
I think in your case, I would listen to the people there who advised you to report him to the police next time. But you know, I think it depends on the culture and the situation you're in, what the people there would do to someone like that, because the people in your neighborhood don't want him acting like that either. So,
yeah, unfortunately, there's no other houses on this block,
yeah.
so we're the only ones that have to hear
Um,
the you know the profanities and the machinery and all of that. But yeah, no, they don't. But there's also, like, this Mexico. I will say, it's a pro and a con. Mexico's culture tends to be very much live and let live.
mhm,
Mind your business. You do what you do on your property. I do what I do on my property. And that's pros and cons to that, right?
mhm.
Um, yeah, I mean, the advice at this point has been to call the police, but of course, being a white woman married to a black man, um, calling the police is not a thing that comes naturally or easily, or, that we um, take lightly. And particularly, as part of it is that idea of conscientious immigration. Like, I don't want to drag the police into this fight between two gringos, you
Mhm,
know? Like, they
mhm.
have bigger things to worry about. Like, I don't want to be that either, right? I don't want to,
Yeah.
because what are they going to do? They're going to come tell him, don't do that, and he's going to say fuck you, or he's going to, try to pay him off. Like, it's not, I don't know. But I'm asking more broadly. I'm saying, like, okay, how can we shift into how can we shift culture, right? To something to something that doesn't yeah, I don't know what I'm asking. I'm at a loss. But I think one thing I do want to know is, like, we can't just afford to keep ignoring the Nick Fuentes. We can't
No.
afford to keep um treating something that is central to the federal government in the United States, making its way into governments globally, right? Because this far right push is not limited to the United States at all. How um how do we fight this? I mean, you know, how do we fight this? We can't treat it as fringe anymore, because it's not fringe. But, like, how do we survive and promote a global, like, agreement that this is not how we want humanity to go? Like, people controlling each other, and people oppressing each other, and people impoverishing each other in order to dominate them. Like, what?
All of that starts. I'm fighting that every day with what I do in my work, and so are you. So that's one way we can fight this. Another way we can fight it is to be the person we want to see in our communities. We can get
Mhm.
involved in our communities. We can try to set examples in our communities. We can also call out this behavior when we see it in our communities. And unfortunately, for somebody like him, it would take my husband calling it out. My
Mhm.
calling it out wouldn't be good enough. I
Yeah.
say this all the time, but more men, and especially white men, need to get a lot more uncomfortable with what they're seeing and call it out. So,
Mhm.
and so those kinds of things can make a real difference over time. It's not going to happen right away, but over
Yeah.
time
Yeah.
it can. You know, I can
Yeah.
I can impact the world if they come and read my Substack. I can impact that
Yeah. Yeah.
world, and I can impact the world around me every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eh,
No, you're right. And I think that it's important to remember, like, we all have our roles, and I have to, I've had to learn, and it's not easy. It's not an easy lesson. It's a lesson I have to learn over and over again, that it doesn't matter how smart I am. It doesn't matter how well reasoned my arguments are. It doesn't matter how nicely I say it. It doesn't matter how big my smile is. There are uh, way more men that I ever knew and still, like, in the last decade, who will not listen to me simply because I was born with a vagina. Like,
yeah,
period. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how good I am. It doesn't matter how nice I am. It doesn't matter what I do. And so, I just have to not try, because that's a waste of my energy.
and that's
To your
that's
point
not
about
about
that,
you. That's about them. So,
yeah,
I
yeah,
I speak to who wants to listen to me and who respects what I have to say, and I don't really care about the
yeah,
rest of those people. So,
yeah. To
I
your point
have
about
a
white men stepping up. Oh, you got to go. Okay, I'm sorry.
no,
We're at an hour.
I
Okay.
have a dinner I have to go to in a few minutes, so I
Okay.
don't have to go immediately, but we need final thoughts.
Well, one final thought. I want to emphasize what you said about white men needing to step up, because my husband's not a white man, but he stepped up, right?
Mhm,
um, the amount of deference that somebody like this person is going to pay to my husband is not going to be the same that he's going to pay to a white man. Um, we did have a white man neighbor that witnessed this, that my husband went and spoke to, who agreed to intervene. But his intervention basically said, like, you guys need to, let him do what he wants.
mm,
That was the extent of his real intervention, even though he saw and knows exactly what went down and how unequal it is. So, that kind of intervention is not that helpful. Like, if you're going to
mhm,
step up.
mhm,
If there are white men listening in right now, and particularly if you have, like, physical presence, if we're talking about in real life, and you have a physical presence that can be utilized to, kind of help people understand that they could be a physical risk if they mess with you, like, you need to step up and not half-ass, not making excuses, not, you need, like, be look at the situation as objectively as possible, and ask yourself, is what's happening here fair? And if it's not, stand on the right side, 10 toes down. Don't, yeah, man. Unless you really fundamentally believe the same thing that these people are saying, in which case you're not safe for us. So
mhm.
you shouldn't even be here. But yeah, you say your final words. Those were mine.
Jennifer said bring back shunning, which I've done. I'm I'm a
Shunning.
big believer in shunning. Yes.
Oh yeah, I
Uh,
shunned everybody.
yeah. So,
I shunned them all.
yeah.
Yeah,
So, that's another tool that has helped my mental health, and boundary
yeah.
setting, which is what I call,
Mhm.
what I think those things are, is, boundaries that I set to help my mental health. So I think those kinds of things are fine too. I would try not to deal with people like that as much as possible.
Yep.
So,
Yep, absolutely. Well, Sammy D says he's a white dude here, been standing up for women and people of color since he was old enough to figure out how people were being treated. Thank you, Sammy D. Keep it up. Keep it up, and encourage your brethren to do the same thing.
yeah.
um, Andra, thank you so much for your time today and your expertise and your insights. I appreciate you so much. I'm like, I love that you got out of the United States. I love that you're turning the horrible, you know, trauma of your childhood into this teachable moment for so many of us that never would know otherwise. I
Mm.
wouldn't know what I know now other than reading what watching what you've your shows and listening to you and reading what you write. So thank you for that. And yeah, that's all subscribe to Andra's Substack. Subscribe to her. Subscribe paid. I am a paid subscriber to Andra's Substack as well, and she's a paid subscriber to my Substack. We probably cancel each other out, but whatever.
Well, but
So
that's
yeah,
not that, and that's not why we're talking. But we both understand that
no,
supporting this work helps make more of this work, and
yeah,
so
exactly.
it's really important to do that if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you are thinking about getting out of the United States and you want to go live someplace where, the federal government is not overtaken and hijacked by white Christian nationalists, then you know where to find me. I can help you do it. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This has been really wonderful. And I feel so much better now than I did this morning. So thank you, Andra,
You're
and enjoy your
welcome.
dinner.
Thank
Mwah.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you. And there we go.